Okay, so here we go. History of the world in 5 minutes. As you heard, Russell wanted me to talk about how the changes going on in the broader society are affecting new media. And this is going to have to stay focused on the big picture, and a great place to start with the big picture is to look at what's happened with world human population growth. As I'm sure all of you know, there's been tremendous growth in the 20th century. From the beginning of the 20th century to now, world population increased by a factor of about 4. What you may not know is that this curve of world population does a wonderful job of following what's known as an S-curve. And S-curves are really important in a lot of biological science, so we can learn a lot about what's happening to us if we better understand what this S-curve means. This sort of S-curve shows up, for instance, after you get a clear cut and the forest starts coming back. It shows up in this sort of way, where the ecosystem biomass increases over time following that kind of S-curve. And the reason that the S-curve bends over is because it's bumping up into the ecosystem overall carrying capacity. And there's a midpoint to that S-curve that's a really important part of understanding this, this whole thing. Before that midpoint, there aren't that many species around to take care or to make use of the resources that are available. After the midpoint, resources become scarcer relative to the amount of biomass that's out there. Before the midpoint, the ecosystem is dominated by what are called pioneer species. And these pioneer species have lots of resources to make use of, lots of sunlight, soil, relative to the competition. There's very little diversity among them. They don't interact much with each other. They're in their own private, individualistic worlds. And growth is the big imperative. All right, that takes us up, partway up the curve. But after that midpoint, what comes in are what are known as succession species. And these are very different than the pioneer species. A good example of a succession forest is old growth forest. This is out in the Ho River rainforest out on the Olympic Peninsula. And here, efficiency is the imperative, not growth. The resources are very thoroughly used and reused and reused. There's lots of diversity with many, many niches. So all of these little tiny plants growing on the big plants is part of the way that this sort of system works. And there's lots of collaboration. So let's take this back to us, humans. Where are we? The midpoint on this curve came 20 years ago, 1989. Up until then, we could count on pioneer-type strategies working really well. But guess what? We're now in a period of time, and going forward, it's the succession strategies that are going to work really well. But we're humans, so we have a bit of a cultural lag, which puts us in a Wile E. Coyote moment. We still think we're in pioneer times, but the reality has shifted underneath us. Now, this is all part of a much bigger process of cultural change. I'm not going to, this is the history of the world. I'm not going to go through it in any kind of detail. But just to point out that 10,000 to 5,000 years ago, there was a really profound transition between hunting and gathering and agriculture in cities. And the other thing that I'm going to say is that we are now in a multi-century transition that I would say is as profound as the shift out of hunting and gathering and into agriculture in cities. But all of our institutions, all of our schooling, all of our culture thinks we're still in the empire period. Well, relative to what we're talking about today, one of the things that was hugely important in this transition was the development of writing and then the organizational structure that went with it, bureaucracy. Now we have new media and we're still inventing it. But this transition is, just as the previous transition totally changed all of the institutions of society, so is it happening here. And the communications tools that we have available will be enormously important in terms of what we are able to do moving forward. So the new media that will thrive will enable us to become more efficient with resources and time, I'm not saying all new media can do this. I'm saying the new media that will thrive will be this way. It will help us differentiate into lots of subgroups and niches. It will help us collaborate within and across subgroups. And it will enable us to build the institutions of the planetary era. So if you want to know where the hell this is all going, that's my suggestion. Thank you very much.